In the dust-covered mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every canyon and hope dies with the setting sun, Marcus Rodriguez was supposed to be dead. The military doctors said his damaged eye would never focus again. His commanding officers said his shaking hands would never hold a rifle steady. His own squad members whispered he was finished, washed up, a liability they couldn't afford in a war zone where one missed shot meant everyone goes home in body bags. But sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one everyone sees coming, it's the one they've already written off. What happened next in those unforgiving mountains would rewrite the rules of modern warfare, turn a broken soldier into a legend, and prove that when everyone counts you out, that's exactly when you become unstoppable. This is the true story of how a man who lost everything found a way to save everyone, one impossible shot at a time. The enemy never saw him coming. They should have. Marcus Rodriguez had always been different from other kids in East LA. While his friends were getting into trouble on street corners, he was on rooftops with his grandfather's old hunting rifle, shooting at cans lined up on fence posts 3 blocks away. His grandfather, a Korean War veteran named Carlos, had taught him that shooting wasn't about anger or violence. It was about discipline, patience, and respect for the weapon in your hands. "Mijo," his grandfather would say in his weathered voice, "a rifle is like a person's word. It only means something if you can trust it completely." Marcus trusted his rifle completely. By age 16, he could hit a silver dollar at 400 yards. By 18, he was enlisting in the army, leaving behind the gang violence and poverty of his neighborhood for what he thought would be a better life. His mother cried the day he left, clutching his high school graduation photo against her chest. She had worked double shifts at the hospital for years, dreaming of seeing him go to college, not war. But Marcus had different plans. He wanted to serve his country, to be part of something bigger than the endless cycle of violence he had grown up watching. The army recruiter had promised him opportunities, training, a chance to use his natural talent with firearms in ways that would make a difference. Basic training was everything Marcus had expected and nothing like he had prepared for. The physical demands were intense but manageable. The mental pressure was something else entirely. Drill sergeants screamed in his face, demanding instant obedience, perfect execution, unwavering commitment. Other recruits cracked under the pressure, but Marcus found something familiar in the discipline. It reminded him of those quiet mornings on the rooftop with his grandfather, learning to control his breathing, steady his hands, focus his mind on nothing but the target in front of him. His shooting scores were exceptional from day one. While other soldiers struggled to qualify with their service rifles, Marcus was hitting targets that seasoned instructors had trouble reaching. Word spread quickly through the training company about the quiet kid from Los Angeles who could shoot like a machine. Officers started taking notice. Special programs were mentioned. Advanced training opportunities were discussed. Marcus excelled in every aspect of his military education. He learned urban warfare tactics, desert survival, communications, field medicine, and weapons maintenance. But it was his marksmanship that set him apart. During advanced individual training, he was selected for the Army's Sniper School, one of the most difficult and prestigious programs the military offered. Sniper School was brutal. The course had a failure rate of over 60%. Students were pushed to their physical and mental limits, learning not just to shoot accurately but to survive alone behind enemy lines for days or weeks at a time. They learned camouflage techniques that could make a man invisible in plain sight. They studied ballistics, weather patterns, and human psychology. They learned to read the battlefield like a book, understanding how terrain, wind, and light could be used as weapons just as deadly as bullets. Marcus thrived in this environment. While other students struggled with the isolation and pressure, he found peace in the solitude. The skills came naturally to him, as if he had been born to be a sniper. His instructors were impressed not just by his shooting ability, but by his tactical thinking, his patience, and his ability to remain calm under extreme stress. After graduating at the top of his sniper class, Marcus was assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the Army's most elite fighting units. The Rangers were known for taking on the most dangerous missions, often operating deep behind enemy lines where conventional forces couldn't go. For Marcus, it felt like coming home. These were serious soldiers, professionals who understood that their job was about more than just following orders. It was about bringing everyone home alive. His first deployment was to Iraq in 2006, during some of the heaviest fighting of the war. Marcus quickly established himself as one of the most reliable snipers in his battalion. His confirmed kill count grew steadily, but more importantly, his ability to provide overwatch for infantry operations saved dozens of American lives. He could spot enemy positions from incredible distances, direct artillery fire with pinpoint accuracy, and eliminate high-value targets before they could threaten his fellow soldiers. The other Rangers respected him not because he was the best shot, though he was, but because he never took unnecessary risks with their lives. Marcus understood that being a sniper wasn't about being a lone wolf hero. It was about being part of a team, using his unique skills to give his brothers in arms every possible advantage. During his second deployment to Afghanistan in 2008, Marcus's reputation continued to grow. The mountainous terrain of Afghanistan was perfect for long-range shooting, and Marcus adapted quickly to the challenges of high-altitude ballistics. The thinner air and unpredictable wind patterns that frustrated other snipers became just another variable for him to calculate and overcome. He was methodical in everything he did. Before every mission, Marcus would spend hours studying satellite images, weather reports, and intelligence briefings. He knew the names and backgrounds of every man in his unit. He understood their strengths and weaknesses, their families back home, their reasons for fighting. This wasn't just professional knowledge for him, it was personal. These men were counting on him to watch their backs, to be their eyes and ears in hostile territory. Marcus's third deployment began in early 2009, and it was during this tour that everything changed. His unit was tasked with clearing Taliban strongholds in the remote mountain regions along the Pakistan border. These were some of the most dangerous areas in Afghanistan, where enemy fighters had built elaborate cave systems and fortified positions that had never been successfully attacked by conventional forces. The mission that would define the rest of Marcus's life began on a cold March morning. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value Taliban commander was meeting with foreign fighters in a compound built into the side of a mountain cliff. The compound was virtually impregnable from ground assault, protected by natural rock formations and a maze of defensive positions. The only way to neutralize the target would be with precision sniper fire from an adjacent mountain peak. Marcus and his spotter, a young sergeant named Danny Chen, were inserted by helicopter onto a neighboring mountain under cover of darkness. They had to hike for 6 hours through treacherous terrain, carrying their equipment and supplies for what was expected to be a 3-day mission. The weight of their gear was enormous, nearly 100 pounds each, but both men were in peak physical condition and accustomed to such demands. They established their position just before dawn, carefully constructing a hide site that would conceal them from enemy observation, while providing clear fields of fire toward the target compound. Marcus set up his rifle, a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum capable of accurate fire at distances exceeding 1,500 meters. The weapon was his most trusted companion, maintained with obsessive care and zeroed to perfection. The first day of surveillance revealed extensive enemy activity around the compound. Marcus counted at least 40 fighters, many of them carrying advanced weapons and equipment that suggested they were experienced combatants. The target building was heavily fortified, with multiple escape routes and defensive positions that would make any ground assault extremely costly. On the second day, Marcus identified the high-value target. Through his spotting scope, he observed a man matching the intelligence photos meeting with several other fighters. The target was only visible for brief moments as he moved between buildings, but Marcus patiently waited for the right opportunity. In sniper work, patience wasn't just a virtue. It was often the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The shot opportunity came on the morning of the third day. The target emerged from the main building and walked toward a vehicle parked in the compound's courtyard. For approximately 15 seconds, he would be in clear view, with no civilians or friendly forces in the background. The range was 1,247 meters, a difficult shot even under ideal conditions, and conditions were far from ideal. The wind was gusting unpredictably through the mountain valleys. The thin air at high altitude would affect the bullet's trajectory. The target was moving, albeit slowly. Marcus had to account for all of these variables in the space of a few seconds, making calculations that would determine whether the mission succeeded or failed. He controlled his breathing, feeling his heart rate slow as he entered the zone of complete focus that all great snipers know. The world narrowed to just him, his rifle, and the target in his scope. His finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure as he tracked the target's movement. The shot broke clean and smooth. Marcus watched through his scope as the bullet traveled across the valley, covering the distance in just over 2 seconds. It struck the target's center mass, eliminating the threat instantly. The mission was a complete success, but what happened next would change everything. As Marcus and Danny prepared to leave their position, enemy fighters began pouring out of the compound, searching for the sniper who had just eliminated their leader. The Taliban had learned to fear American snipers and were determined to hunt down whoever was responsible for the killing. Within minutes, dozens of fighters were climbing the mountain slopes, working their way toward Marcus's position. The extraction helicopter wasn't due for another 6 hours. Marcus and Danny found themselves trapped on the mountain with nowhere to go, and an increasingly desperate enemy force closing in on their location. They had two choices: abandon their equipment and attempt to evade capture by fleeing across the mountains, or stand and fight from their fortified position. Marcus made the decision to fight. Their position was strong, they had adequate ammunition, and he was confident in his ability to hold off the attackers until extraction arrived. What he didn't anticipate was the mortar round that changed everything. The explosion came without warning. One moment Marcus was scanning the mountainside through his rifle scope, the next he was thrown violently against the rocks as shrapnel tore through their position. When the dust settled, Danny was unconscious and bleeding heavily from a head wound. Marcus's vision was blurred, his right eye filled with blood from cuts caused by flying debris. But the attack wasn't over. Enemy fighters were still advancing up the mountain, now aware of exactly where the sniper position was located. Marcus had to continue fighting despite his injuries, using his rifle to hold off attackers while trying to treat Danny's wounds and call for emergency extraction. For the next 4 hours, Marcus single-handedly defended their position against repeated assaults. His damaged eye made it difficult to acquire targets accurately, but his training and experience kept him effective even under impossible circumstances. He eliminated 17 enemy fighters during the siege, buying time until rescue helicopters could reach their location. The extraction was successful, but the damage was done. Marcus's right eye had sustained serious injuries that would affect his vision permanently. Danny survived, but required extensive medical treatment and was eventually medically discharged from the army. Marcus spent 3 months in military hospitals, undergoing multiple surgeries to save what vision he could. When the doctors finished their work, Marcus learned the devastating truth. His dominant eye, the one he had relied on for shooting his entire life, would never focus properly again. The precise vision that had made him one of the Army's most effective snipers was gone forever. Medical boards recommended his discharge from active duty. His commanding officers expressed their sympathy, but made it clear that a sniper who couldn't see clearly was a liability the unit couldn't afford. Marcus returned to the United States in late 2009, officially classified as medically unfit for combat duty. The Army offered him desk jobs, training positions, anything that would keep him in service without requiring him to handle weapons. But Marcus knew those offers were charity. His identity as a soldier, as a sniper, as someone who made a difference on the battlefield, all of that was gone. The transition to civilian life was brutal. Marcus moved back to Los Angeles, living with his mother in the same neighborhood he had left years earlier. The gang violence was worse than ever. The poverty was deeper. The hopelessness was more profound. But now Marcus felt like he belonged to it in a way he never had before. He was broken, useless, counted out by everyone who mattered. His grandfather had died while he was overseas. The man who had taught him to shoot, who had instilled in him the discipline and respect for firearms that had defined his military career, was gone. Marcus spent hours on the same rooftop where he had learned to shoot as a child, but now the rifle felt foreign in his hands. His vision was unreliable. His hand shook from nerve damage caused by the explosion. The skills that had once defined him seemed to have disappeared completely. Depression set in quickly. Marcus stopped leaving the house except when absolutely necessary. He avoided contact with friends from his military service. He couldn't bear to hear their stories of continued success, while he sat at home, collecting disability payments and feeling sorry for himself. The proud soldier who had once been counted on to protect others now couldn't even protect himself from his own despair. His mother, Maria, watched her son's decline with growing concern. The confident young man who had left for the army had been replaced by someone she barely recognized. Marcus spent most days sleeping or staring at the television, showing no interest in the future or any plans for rebuilding his life. When she tried to talk to him about possibilities, college, job training, anything that might give him purpose, he would shut down completely. The low point came on a rainy Tuesday evening in January 2010. Marcus was alone in the house, his mother working the night shift at the hospital. He sat on his childhood bed, holding his grandfather's old hunting rifle, the same weapon that had started him on the path to becoming a sniper. The irony wasn't lost on him, that the thing he had once trusted most in the world now felt completely unreliable in his hands. He thought about Danny Chen, recovering from his injuries at a VA hospital in Texas. He thought about the Rangers still deployed in Afghanistan, facing the same dangers he had once shared with them. He thought about his grandfather who had survived Korea and built a good life despite the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the middle of the night. Carlos had never given up, even when things seemed hopeless. That night, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of ending his story, he decided to find a way to write a new chapter. He didn't know how it would be possible, didn't know if he could ever be useful again, but he knew he had to try. His grandfather had always told him that a man's worth wasn't measured by how many times he got knocked down, but by how many times he got back up. The next morning, Marcus began the long journey back from the bottom. He didn't know where it would lead him, or if he would ever be able to serve his country again, but he knew he couldn't quit. Too many people were counting on him, even if he couldn't see them yet. The road ahead would be harder than anything he had faced in combat. But Marcus Rodriguez was about to learn that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight when everyone has already counted you out. The first step Marcus took toward rebuilding his life was the hardest, admitting he needed help. Pride had always been both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. In the army, pride had driven him to excel, to never accept anything less than perfection from himself. But now that same pride was keeping him trapped in a cycle of self-pity and isolation that threatened to destroy him completely. It was his mother who finally broke through his resistance. Maria Rodriguez had raised 4 children as a single mother while working as a nurse's aide at County General Hospital. She had seen Marcus at his best and worst, had watched him transform from a troubled teenager into a decorated soldier, and she wasn't about to let him give up now. "You think you're the first person to get hurt and feel sorry for himself?" she asked one morning, standing in his bedroom doorway with her hands on her hips.
You think your grandfather didn't come back from Korea with problems?
"You think I didn't have days when I wanted to quit after your father left us with nothing?" Marcus looked up from his bed, surprised by the steel in his mother's voice. She rarely raised her voice, preferring to guide her children with quiet strength and endless patience. But this was different. This was a mother who had reached the end of her patience with a son who was wasting the life she had worked so hard to give him. "The difference," she continued, "is that we didn't have the luxury of giving up. We had people depending on us, and you still have people depending on you, even if you're too wrapped up in your own pain to see them." She was right, and Marcus knew it. But knowing something and acting on it were two different things. The next few weeks were a constant internal battle between the part of him that wanted to fight and the part that had accepted defeat. Some days the fighter won, other days he could barely get out of bed. His first attempt at seeking professional help was a disaster. The VA counselor was a well-meaning woman who had never served in combat, had never killed anyone, had never watched friends die or felt responsible for keeping other people alive. Her textbook solutions and clinical language felt like insults to the complexity of what Marcus was experiencing. "You're dealing with survivor's guilt," she explained during their second session. "It's common among veterans who've been removed from combat situations due to injury. You feel guilty that you're safe while your unit is still in danger." Marcus wanted to laugh at the oversimplification. Survivor's guilt was part of it, but only a small part. What he was really dealing with was the complete destruction of his identity. For nearly a decade, he had been Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, one of the most effective snipers in the U.S. Army. Now he was just Marcus, a broken veteran, living in his mother's house, collecting disability checks, and trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While walking through his old neighborhood one afternoon, trying to force himself to get some exercise, Marcus heard gunshots. Not the controlled, precise sounds of military weapons, but the rapid, undisciplined firing of handguns. Gang violence was escalating in East LA, and innocent people were caught in the crossfire more frequently than ever. Marcus's first instinct was to take cover and call the police, but something else kicked in. His training, his protective instincts, his inability to ignore danger when civilians were at risk. He moved toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it, using the urban warfare skills he had learned in the army to navigate through the neighborhood safely. He found the source of the shooting 2 blocks away. A group of teenagers had cornered an older man near a corner store, demanding money while waving guns around with no regard for safety or accuracy. The old man was terrified, but more concerning to Marcus were the families with small children who were trapped in nearby buildings, afraid to leave their homes while the shooting continued. Marcus didn't have a weapon, couldn't legally carry one due to his medical discharge status, but he had something more valuable than firepower: tactical knowledge. He observed the situation for several minutes, identifying escape routes, cover positions, and the behavioral patterns of the gunmen. Then he called the police and provided them with detailed intelligence about the situation. When patrol units arrived, Marcus's information allowed them to position themselves strategically and resolve the situation without anyone getting seriously injured. The responding sergeant was impressed by the quality of intelligence he had received and asked Marcus about his background. Learning that he was a former Army sniper, the sergeant suggested he consider a career in law enforcement. "We could use someone with your training and experience," the sergeant said. The gangs around here are getting more sophisticated. Using military-style tactics they're learning from veterans who've gone bad. We need good veterans to help us fight back. The idea intrigued Marcus, but it also terrified him. Law enforcement would require him to handle weapons again, to make split-second decisions under pressure, to be responsible for protecting innocent people. His damaged vision and nerve problems made all of those requirements seem impossible. But that night, lying in bed and thinking about what he had witnessed, Marcus realized something important. His military skills weren't just about shooting. The tactical awareness, the ability to read dangerous situations, the training to remain calm under pressure, those abilities were still intact. His identity as a protector didn't have to die with his career as a sniper. Marcus began researching law enforcement opportunities for disabled veterans. He discovered programs designed specifically for combat veterans with injuries, training methods that could adapt to different physical limitations, and departments that valued military experience highly enough to work around medical issues. The LAPD had a veterans recruitment program that seemed promising. They offered modified training for injured veterans, focusing on intelligence gathering, tactical planning, and specialized units that didn't require frontline patrol duties. Marcus submitted an application. Not entirely sure he was making the right decision, but knowing he had to try something. The application process was lengthy and intrusive. Medical examinations, psychological evaluations, background investigations, and interviews that forced Marcus to relive the worst moments of his military service. Several times he considered withdrawing his application, convinced that his injuries made him unsuitable for police work. The medical examination was particularly challenging. Police department doctors had to determine whether his vision problems and nerve damage would prevent him from performing essential job functions safely. Marcus was honest about his limitations, but he also demonstrated the adaptations he had developed. His left eye had compensated for some of the vision loss in his right eye. His hands were steadier when he was focused and calm. His tactical knowledge and experience more than made up for his physical limitations. After 3 months of testing and evaluation, Marcus received a conditional job offer. He would be accepted into a modified police academy program designed for veterans with disabilities, with the understanding that his assignment options might be limited based on his performance and medical restrictions. The police academy was both easier and harder than Marcus had expected. The physical demands were less intense than military training, but the legal and procedural requirements were far more complex. He had to learn an entirely new set of rules about when force could be used, how evidence must be collected, what rights suspects possessed. In the military, the enemy was clearly defined and the mission was straightforward: eliminate threats and protect American forces. In law enforcement, every situation was ambiguous, every decision was scrutinized, and making the wrong choice could end his career or land him in prison. Marcus struggled initially with the academic aspects of police training. Memorizing penal codes and legal procedures didn't come as naturally to him as military tactics and weapons handling, but his instructors recognized his dedication and provided extra help when needed. More importantly, his fellow recruits, many of them also military veterans, created a support network that helped him work through the challenges. The firearms training portion of the academy was the moment Marcus had been dreading. He would have to demonstrate proficiency with handguns and shotguns, passing tests that required accuracy under time pressure. His damaged vision and shaking hands made this seem impossible, but his instructors were willing to work with him to find solutions. Instead of using his dominant right eye for shooting, Marcus trained himself to shoot left-handed, using his stronger left eye for aiming. It felt awkward and unnatural at first, like learning to write with the wrong hand, but gradually he began to adapt. His scores weren't as high as they had been during his military days, but they were good enough to meet departmental standards. More importantly, Marcus discovered that his tactical knowledge gave him advantages that compensated for his decreased marksmanship. He could read dangerous situations faster than other recruits. He understood cover and concealment better. He knew how to position himself to minimize risk while maximizing his ability to help civilians and fellow officers. Marcus graduated from the police academy in the middle of his class academically, but at the top in tactical scenarios and crisis management. His instructors recommended him for specialized assignment rather than routine patrol duties, recognizing that his unique skills and limitations made him better suited for certain types of police work. His first assignment was with the LAPD's Gang Intelligence Unit, working to identify and track organized criminal groups operating throughout East Los Angeles. It was perfect for Marcus's skill set. He spent most of his time analyzing surveillance photos, mapping criminal networks, and planning tactical operations rather than making arrests or engaging in high-speed pursuits. The work was satisfying in ways Marcus hadn't expected. He was using his military intelligence training to help protect the community where he had grown up. The gangs he was tracking were the same ones that had terrorized his neighborhood when he was a child. The same criminal organizations that continued to prey on families just like his own. Marcus's breakthrough case came 6 months into his assignment. Gang violence in East LA had escalated dramatically, with several shootings involving high-powered rifles that suggested military training or equipment. Traditional police tactics weren't effective against criminals who understood cover, concealment, and coordinated attacks. Marcus recognized patterns in the violence that other investigators had missed. The precision of the attacks, the weapons being used, the tactical coordination between different gang units, it all suggested military training. Using his contacts from the army, Marcus began investigating whether discharged veterans were training gang members or selling military equipment on the black market. His investigation led to a disturbing discovery. A discharged Marine who had been kicked out of the Corps for disciplinary problems was running a training camp in the desert outside Los Angeles, teaching gang members urban warfare tactics in exchange for large payments. The Marine, a former infantry sergeant named Robert Hayes, was using his military knowledge to make criminal organizations more deadly and effective. Marcus's intelligence work identified the location of the training camp and provided evidence of Hayes's activities. But the remote desert location and the military-style defenses around the camp made it extremely dangerous for regular police units to approach. SWAT teams were trained for urban environments, not desert warfare against an entrenched enemy with military experience. That's when Marcus proposed something that seemed impossible. He wanted to return to his role as a sniper, providing overwatch and intelligence gathering for a tactical assault on the camp. His supervisors were skeptical, knowing about his vision problems and medical limitations. But Marcus had spent months adapting to his injuries, learning new techniques, and proving that his tactical knowledge was still valuable. The operation required extensive planning and coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. Marcus would be positioned on high ground overlooking the camp, using specialized equipment to provide intelligence and cover fire if needed. He wouldn't be expected to make the precise, long-range shots that had defined his military career, but he could still contribute to the mission's success. 3 weeks before the planned operation, Marcus received devastating news. Danny Chen, his former spotter, and the man whose life he had saved during their final mission in Afghanistan, had committed suicide at a VA hospital in Texas. The head injuries Danny had sustained during the mortar attack had caused persistent problems with depression and cognitive function. Despite everyone's best efforts to help him, Danny had finally given up the fight. Marcus was crushed by the loss of his friend and battle buddy. Danny's death brought back all the guilt and self-doubt that had nearly destroyed Marcus after his medical discharge. He considered withdrawing from the gang camp operation, convinced that his presence would only endanger other officers the same way his actions had gotten Danny hurt. But Danny's funeral changed everything for Marcus. Dozens of soldiers and veterans attended the service, paying their respects to a man who had served his country with distinction and paid a terrible price for that service. Marcus met Danny's parents, who thanked him for saving their son's life in Afghanistan and giving them 2 extra years with him. "Danny never blamed you for what happened," his father said. "He used to say that you were the best soldier he ever served with, and he was proud to have been your spotter. He wouldn't want his death to stop you from continuing to serve." Marcus realized that the best way to honor Danny's memory was to continue using his skills to protect innocent people, even if it meant accepting the risks that came with that responsibility. He recommitted to the gang camp operation, but with a new understanding of what was at stake and a renewed determination to succeed. The final weeks of preparation were intensive. Marcus worked with ballistics experts to adjust his equipment for his vision limitations. He practiced shooting positions that minimized the effects of his nerve damage. He studied the target area until he knew every rock, bush, and potential hiding place that could be used by either attackers or defenders. Most importantly, Marcus reconnected with the sense of purpose that had sustained him through his military service. He wasn't just Marcus Rodriguez, disabled veteran living in his mother's house. He was police officer Marcus Rodriguez, using his hard-earned skills to protect his community from predators who threatened innocent people. The operation was scheduled for dawn on a Tuesday morning in October 2010. Marcus would finally have the chance to prove that being counted out didn't mean being useless, that adaptation and determination could overcome even the most serious limitations. But as he prepared his equipment the night before the mission, Marcus had no idea that the gang camp operation would be just the beginning of an even more dangerous journey. The skills he had developed adapting to his injuries, the tactical knowledge he had gained working gang intelligence, and the renewed sense of purpose he had found in law enforcement were all preparing him for challenges he couldn't yet imagine. The boy from East LA who had become an elite sniper, lost everything in an explosion, and rebuilt himself as a police officer, was about to face the greatest test of his life. And this time, the stakes would be even higher than anything he had encountered in Afghanistan. The desert operation began before sunrise on October 12, 2010. Marcus positioned himself on a rocky outcropping 1,200 meters from the training camp, close enough to provide effective overwatch but far enough away to avoid detection by the gang members and their military instructor. The familiar weight of a precision rifle felt strange in his hands after so many months away from sniper work, but the basic muscle memory was still there. Through his modified scope, Marcus could see the camp clearly. Robert Hayes had constructed an elaborate training facility using military engineering principles. Defensive positions were well planned and mutually supporting. Escape routes were numerous and well concealed. The entire facility was designed to withstand assault by conventional law enforcement tactics. What worried Marcus most was the evidence of serious military hardware scattered throughout the camp. He spotted at least 3.50 caliber machine guns positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire, along with military-grade communications equipment and night vision devices. This wasn't a group of street criminals playing soldier. This was a legitimate military-style force that could inflict heavy casualties on attacking police units. As the sun rose, Marcus began counting personnel and identifying key targets. Hayes himself was easily recognizable from surveillance photos, moving between different training areas and instructing gang members on advanced combat techniques. Marcus counted 43 individuals in the camp, far more than intelligence estimates had suggested. The assault team consisted of 36 officers from multiple agencies, including LAPD SWAT, county sheriff's deputies, and federal agents. They were professional and well-trained, but most of their experience was with urban operations against criminals who panicked under pressure. The gang members being trained by Hayes had been taught to fight back effectively against law enforcement, turning what should have been a routine arrest operation into a potential military engagement. Marcus's radio crackled with updates as the assault teams moved into position. Team Alpha would approach from the east, using a dry riverbed for concealment. Team Bravo would circle around to block the primary escape route. Team Charlie, the smallest unit, would provide backup and handle any unexpected complications. The plan was solid in theory, but Marcus could already see problems developing. The gang members weren't behaving like typical criminals. They had posted professional-quality sentries who were actively scanning for approaching threats. Their weapons were positioned strategically rather than randomly. Most concerning of all, they showed no signs of panic or confusion as police units moved closer to the camp.
"Control, this is Overwatch,"
Marcus whispered into his radio microphone. Suspects appear to be aware of approaching units. Recommend extreme caution on approach. These are not typical gang members. The tactical commander acknowledged Marcus's report, but continued with the original plan. Intelligence assessments had indicated that the gang members were still in training and wouldn't be capable of organized resistance. The presence of Hayes certainly made them more dangerous. But 36 experienced law enforcement officers should be able to handle 43 criminals, regardless of their training level. Marcus wasn't convinced. Through his scope, he watched Hayes moving purposefully between different positions, clearly preparing his students for an imminent assault. The former Marine was treating this like a military operation, not a law enforcement action. That fundamental difference in approach was about to cost lives. The first shots came from Team Alpha's position at 0647 hours. Marcus watched through his scope as two officers moved across open ground toward the camp's perimeter, following standard police tactics for approaching a static target. What they didn't realize was that Hayes had positioned his machine gun teams specifically to target those approach routes. The .50 caliber machine gun that opened fire on Team Alpha was devastating. The heavy rounds tore through the police vehicles the officers were using for cover, forcing them to retreat to positions that offered no protection from the elevated gun positions Hayes had established. Within seconds, 3 officers were wounded and the entire assault plan was falling apart. All units, we are taking heavy fire from fortified positions," came the frantic radio transmission from Team Alpha's leader. "We have multiple casualties and are pinned down. Cannot advance to primary objective." Marcus had a clear shot at the machine gun position that was devastating Team Alpha, but the range was at the extreme limit of his capabilities with damaged vision and modified equipment. The target was partially concealed behind sandbags and steel plates, requiring precise placement to be effective. Miss by even a few inches, and he would accomplish nothing while revealing his position to every enemy fighter in the camp. But American police officers were dying, and Marcus was the only person in position to help them. He steadied his rifle, controlled his breathing, and calculated the complex ballistics required for the shot. The The morning sun was creating heat distortions that made precise aiming difficult. Wind patterns in the desert were unpredictable. His damaged right eye was making it hard to achieve perfect focus on the target. The shot broke clean and true, sending a .338 Lapua Magnum round across 1,200 meters of desert terrain in just over 2 seconds. Marcus watched through his scope as the bullet struck the machine gunner in the upper chest, eliminating the threat immediately and allowing Team Alpha to begin extracting their wounded officers. But Marcus's success had revealed his position to Hayes, who quickly redirected several gang members to locate and eliminate the police sniper. Marcus found himself in the same situation he had faced in Afghanistan, outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for his life against enemies who wanted to kill him specifically. The difference was that this time, Marcus was fighting to protect American law enforcement officers rather than soldiers. These weren't abstract strategic objectives or distant political goals. These were men and women who had families waiting for them to come home safely. The stakes felt more personal and immediate than anything he had experienced in combat. Hayes proved to be a formidable opponent. The former Marine understood how to coordinate his forces effectively, using the gang members like soldiers rather than criminals. He established fire teams to suppress the police assault teams, while sending other groups to flank Marcus's position. It was sophisticated military tactics being employed by people who were supposed to be street criminals. Marcus found himself fighting a defensive battle from his position on the rocky outcropping. Gang members approached from multiple directions, forcing him to engage targets at various ranges and angles. His damaged vision made it difficult to acquire targets quickly, but his tactical knowledge allowed him to position himself advantageously and make every shot count. The engagement lasted for nearly 4 hours. Marcus eliminated 11 gang members who were threatening police officers while also calling in precise intelligence about enemy positions and movements. His radio communications helped coordinate the law enforcement response, turning a chaotic firefight into a structured tactical operation. The turning point came when Marcus identified Hayes' command position in a reinforced bunker at the center of the camp. The former Marine was directing the entire battle from this location, making him the most important target on the battlefield. Eliminating Hayes would disrupt the gang members' coordination and likely cause their organized resistance to collapse. But the shot would be extraordinarily difficult. The range was over 1,400 meters, at the very limit of his equipment's capability. Hayes was partially concealed behind concrete barriers, exposing only his head and shoulders for brief moments. The heat distortion from the desert floor was severe, and wind conditions were constantly changing. Marcus studied the target for over an hour, learning Hayes' movement patterns and looking for the perfect opportunity. He calculated and recalculated the ballistics, accounting for every variable he could identify. This would be a one-shot opportunity, miss, and Hayes would disappear into the bunker system where Marcus couldn't reach him. The moment came when Hayes exposed himself to observe the battlefield through binoculars. For approximately 8 seconds, he would be visible from Marcus's position. 8 seconds to make a shot that would determine whether more police officers lived or died. Marcus controlled his breathing and focused everything on the crosshairs of his scope. His damaged eye strained to maintain perfect clarity on the distant target. His hands, steadied by years of training and months of adaptation, held the rifle motionless despite the nerve damage that usually caused tremors. The shot was perfect. Marcus watched through his scope as the bullet covered the distance in less than 3 seconds, striking Hayes exactly where he had aimed. The gang member's leader was eliminated instantly, and their organized resistance began to crumble immediately. Without Hayes' tactical leadership, the gang members reverted to their natural behavior as street criminals. Instead of fighting as coordinated military units, they began seeking individual escape routes or surrendering when confronted by police officers. The sophisticated military operation Hayes had created dissolved into chaos within minutes of his death. The final gang member surrendered at 11:27 hours, ending a battle that had claimed the lives of 2 police officers and left 8 others wounded. 17 gang members were killed during the engagement, with 26 others taken into custody. The training camp was completely destroyed, along with a significant quantity of military-grade weapons and equipment. Marcus's role in the operation's success was undeniable. His intelligence gathering had provided crucial information about enemy positions and capabilities. His sniper fire had eliminated specific threats that were killing police officers. Most importantly, his elimination of Hayes had ended the organized resistance and prevented additional casualties. But the personal cost was severe. The intense concentration required to make difficult shots with damaged vision had caused severe headaches and eye strain that lasted for weeks. The stress of the prolonged engagement had triggered anxiety symptoms that reminded Marcus of his worst days after returning from Afghanistan. Most difficult of all, he had killed 11 people in a single day, more than during most of his military deployments. The media attention following the gang camp operation was overwhelming. Marcus found himself being hailed as a hero, the disabled veteran who had overcome his injuries to save the lives of fellow law enforcement officers. News interviews, magazine articles, and television documentaries all wanted to tell his story of triumph over adversity. Marcus hated every minute of the attention. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been forced to kill people to protect others, same as he had felt during his military service. The praise and recognition felt hollow when he thought about the officers who had died during the operation, or the gang members who were dead because of his accurate shooting. More concerning was the way his success was being interpreted by law enforcement agencies throughout the country. Police departments dealing with increasingly sophisticated criminal organizations began requesting Marcus's assistance with their own tactical operations. Military contractors offered him lucrative positions, training law enforcement snipers. Federal agencies suggested he consider working for them in counter-terrorism roles. All of these opportunities would have been flattering under different circumstances, but Marcus was exhausted. The gang camp operation had proven that he could still be effective despite his injuries, but it had also shown him the physical and emotional costs of that effectiveness. His vision problems were getting worse from the strain of precision shooting. His anxiety symptoms were becoming more frequent and severe. Marcus took a 6-month leave of absence from LAPD to recover from the operation and decide what he wanted to do with his future. He spent the time traveling, visiting Danny Chen's grave in Texas, reconnecting with Army friends, and trying to understand what his experience meant for his long-term plans. The answer came during a visit to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where Marcus volunteered to work with wounded veterans who were struggling with transitions to civilian life. Many of them were dealing with injuries similar to his own. Vision problems, nerve damage, traumatic brain injuries, and the psychological challenges that came with losing their military identities. Marcus discovered that his experience overcoming his own disabilities gave him credibility with other wounded veterans that medical professionals couldn't match. He understood their frustrations, their fears, and their resistance to accepting help. More importantly, he could demonstrate that adaptation and recovery were possible even when the odds seemed impossible. Working with other veterans gave Marcus a sense of purpose that was different from anything he had experienced in law enforcement or the military. Instead of protecting people by eliminating threats, he was helping people rebuild their lives after trauma had destroyed their previous identities. The skills were different, but the core mission was the same, using his abilities to help others overcome challenges they couldn't handle alone. When Marcus returned to Los Angeles in early 2011, he had made a decision about his future. He would continue working with LAPD, but in a training and consulting role rather than active operations. He would use his experience to help other officers understand how to work with disabled veterans, how to adapt tactics for different physical limitations, and how to provide effective support for law enforcement personnel dealing with service-related injuries. The decision disappointed some of his supervisors, who had hoped to use Marcus's proven abilities for additional high-risk operations. But Marcus had learned something important during his recovery. Being effective wasn't the same as being expendable. His value as a law enforcement officer wasn't just in his ability to make difficult shots under pressure. It was in his ability to help others develop their own capabilities and overcome their own limitations. Marcus's new role was challenging in different ways than combat or tactical operations. Teaching required patience, empathy, and communication skills that were completely different from the decisive action orientation of military and police work. He had to learn how to break down complex tactical concepts into understandable components, how to motivate people who were struggling with confidence issues, and how to adapt training methods for individuals with various physical and psychological limitations. His first major assignment was developing a training program for law enforcement veterans who had sustained service-related injuries. Many police departments had no systematic approach for helping injured officers return to duty or transition to different roles within their organizations. Veterans with military experience often faced additional challenges adapting to civilian law enforcement culture while also dealing with service-connected disabilities. Marcus's program combined traditional police tactics training with adaptive techniques he had developed for his own limitations. Officers with vision problems learned new aiming methods. Personnel with mobility restrictions were taught modified positioning and movement techniques. Everyone learned that effectiveness could be maintained or even enhanced by working around limitations rather than pretending they didn't exist. The program's success led to requests from police departments throughout California and eventually across the country. Marcus found himself traveling extensively, conducting training sessions and consulting with agencies that were dealing with their own disabled veteran personnel. Each assignment taught him something new about adaptation, resilience, and the importance of recognizing individual strengths, even within the context of physical limitations. But Marcus's most important challenge was still ahead of him. In late 2011, he received a phone call that would test everything he had learned about overcoming adversity and adapting to impossible circumstances. The call came from a military contact he hadn't heard from in over 2 years, and the request that followed would force Marcus to confront the most difficult decision of his life. American soldiers were dying in Afghanistan, and their deaths were connected to the same kind of military training that Marcus had disrupted at the game camp in the California desert. This time, the enemy had learned from Hayes's mistakes, creating an even more sophisticated threat that conventional military tactics couldn't counter effectively. They needed Marcus to return to Afghanistan, not as a soldier, but as something entirely new. A consultant who could help American forces adapt their tactics to fight an enemy that had learned too much about how to kill American troops. The assignment would be dangerous, physically demanding, and emotionally traumatic for someone who had already sacrificed so much for his country. Marcus had 72 hours to make a decision that would determine the rest of his life: accept the assignment and risk everything he had built during his recovery, or decline and live with the knowledge that American soldiers might die because he chose personal safety over service to others. The choice should have been easy for someone who had already proven he was willing to sacrifice everything for his fellow service members. But Marcus had learned something during his journey from broken veteran to effective law enforcement officer. Sometimes the most important decision isn't whether to fight, but how to fight, in ways that maximize your effectiveness while minimizing the cost to yourself and others. His answer would determine whether the story of Marcus Rodriguez ended as a tale of personal triumph over adversity, or continued as something far more complex and dangerous. The request came from Colonel James Mitchell, Marcus's former commanding officer in the 75th Ranger Regiment. Mitchell had been promoted since Marcus's medical discharge and was now overseeing counterinsurgency operations throughout eastern Afghanistan. The situation he described during their secure phone conversation was unlike anything American forces had encountered before. "We are losing soldiers to tactics that mirror our own training methods," Mitchell explained, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. "The enemy has access to detailed knowledge of American military procedures, equipment capabilities, and tactical doctrines. They're not just fighting us, they're fighting us using our own methods against us." Intelligence reports indicated that a sophisticated training network had been established in the remote mountain regions along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Former military personnel from various countries were teaching advanced combat techniques to Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters, creating an enemy force that understood American tactics better than most American soldiers. The network's effectiveness was devastating. American casualties in eastern Afghanistan had increased by 40% over the previous 6 months. Routine patrols were being ambushed using military-style coordination and advanced weapons. Forward operating bases were coming under attack from enemies who understood exactly how American defensive positions were organized and where their vulnerabilities lay. Traditional military responses weren't working. Conventional forces couldn't locate the training camps, which were hidden in terrain that was virtually inaccessible to large units. Special operations forces had attempted several raids, but the enemy's advanced warning systems and military-style defenses had made those missions too costly to continue. "We need someone who understands both sides of this equation," Mitchell continued. "Someone who knows American tactics well enough to identify how they're being used against us, and who has experience fighting irregular forces using conventional military methods." Marcus was the obvious choice for such an assignment. His experience in Afghanistan had given him intimate knowledge of the terrain and enemy capabilities. His law enforcement work had taught him how to identify and disrupt training networks. Most importantly, his adaptation to his own disabilities had given him insights into unconventional approaches that might be effective where traditional methods had failed. But accepting the assignment would mean leaving everything he had built during his recovery. The teaching position with LAPD had given him stability and purpose. His work with wounded veterans was making a real difference in people's lives. His mother had finally stopped worrying about him constantly, confident that he had found a path forward that didn't involve constant danger. Marcus requested 72 hours to consider the offer, knowing that his decision would affect more than just his own future. If he declined, American soldiers would continue dying, while military leaders struggled to find alternative solutions. If he accepted, he would be risking not just his own life but the psychological stability he had worked so hard to achieve. He spent the next 3 days talking to people whose opinions mattered to him. His mother was predictably opposed to the idea, having already watched her son nearly destroyed by one war. His colleagues at LAPD were divided. Some thought his unique experience made the assignment a moral obligation, while others believed he had already given enough to his country. The conversation that ultimately influenced his decision came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos was a sergeant in the Army's Medical Corps who had been one of the first students in Marcus's adaptive training program. She had lost her left leg to an improvised explosive device during her second deployment to Iraq, and initially believed her military career was over. Marcus had worked with her for 6 months, helping her adapt her medical techniques to accommodate her prosthetic leg and modified mobility. She had not only returned to active duty but had volunteered for deployment to Afghanistan, where she was serving as a medic with a forward surgical team. "You taught me that limitations only define you if you let them," she said during a video call from her base in Kandahar. "But you also taught me that service means finding ways to help people, not finding ways to get yourself killed. If you go back to Afghanistan, make sure you're going for the right reasons." Her words crystallized something Marcus had been struggling to articulate. The question wasn't whether he owed his country more service. He had already given more than anyone could reasonably expect. The question was whether he could develop a way to help solve this problem that utilized his unique capabilities without repeating the pattern of sacrifice that had defined his previous military service. Marcus called Colonel Mitchell with a counterproposal. Instead of deploying to Afghanistan as a traditional consultant, he would work with intelligence analysts and tactical planners to develop new approaches from a secure location. He would review operational intelligence, analyze enemy tactics, and recommend countermeasures that could be implemented by forces already in theater. It wasn't the solution Mitchell had hoped for, but it was better than losing Marcus's expertise entirely. The colonel agreed to a 6-month contract that would allow Marcus to contribute to the effort while maintaining his civilian status and staying close to his support network in Los Angeles. Marcus's work began in a secure facility in Virginia, where he had access to classified intelligence reports, operational summaries, and detailed analysis of enemy activities throughout eastern Afghanistan. The scope of the problem was even worse than Mitchell had indicated during their initial conversation. The enemy training network wasn't just teaching tactical skills, they were conducting sophisticated intelligence operations that gave them detailed knowledge of American military procedures. They knew standard patrol routes, communication protocols, supply schedules, and defensive arrangements for most American bases in eastern Afghanistan. This intelligence advantage was being combined with advanced military training to create an enemy force that could predict and counter American tactics before they were even implemented. Marcus spent weeks studying patterns in American casualties, looking for commonalities that might reveal how the enemy was acquiring their intelligence and applying their training. What he discovered was both impressive and terrifying. The network wasn't just training individual fighters, but was creating coordinated military units that could execute complex operations requiring precise timing and multiple moving parts. The sophistication suggested involvement by personnel with advanced military education and extensive combat experience. These weren't just discharged soldiers teaching basic combat skills. These were professional military trainers creating an enemy force that rivaled the capabilities of conventional armies. Marcus's analysis identified 3 primary training locations based on the tactical signatures of attacks being conducted throughout the region. Each location appeared to specialize in different types of training. One focused on urban warfare and close-quarters combat, another on long-range engagement and sniper techniques, and the third on coordination and intelligence gathering. More concerning was evidence that the training network was expanding beyond Afghanistan. Intelligence reports suggested similar operations in Iraq, Syria, and several African countries where terrorist organizations were active. If the network continued to grow, American forces could face sophisticated military opposition wherever they deployed. Marcus's recommendations focused on disrupting the network's intelligence gathering capabilities rather than attempting direct military attacks on the training facilities. The camps were too well defended and too remote for conventional assault, but their intelligence operations required communication systems and human assets that were vulnerable to counterintelligence activities. His plan involved identifying and eliminating the network's sources of information about American military operations. This would require a combination of signals intelligence, counterintelligence operations, and carefully controlled disinformation campaigns designed to feed false information to enemy planners. The approach was accepted by military leadership, and Marcus found himself working with intelligence professionals from multiple agencies to implement his recommendations. It was satisfying work that utilized his tactical knowledge without requiring him to return to combat personally, but it also revealed the limitations of remote analysis. 3 months into the project, it became clear that Marcus's recommendations were only partially effective. The intelligence disruption operations had reduced enemy effectiveness somewhat, but American casualties were still at unacceptable levels. The training network had adapted to American countermeasures faster than anticipated, suggesting even more sophisticated leadership than initially assessed. Colonel Mitchell contacted Marcus with a blunt assessment. "Your analysis has been helpful, but we need someone on the ground who can see what we're missing. The enemy is adapting faster than we can respond from here." This time, the request was more specific. Marcus wouldn't be asked to participate in direct combat operations, but would deploy to Afghanistan as an intelligence analyst and tactical advisor. He would work from secure bases, reviewing current intelligence and observing enemy activities to identify weaknesses that couldn't be detected from remote analysis. The assignment would be dangerous. Forward operating bases in eastern Afghanistan were under regular attack, but it wouldn't require the kind of combat exposure that had led to Marcus's original injuries. He would be protected by multiple layers of security and would have access to medical facilities if his vision problems or other health issues became serious. Marcus accepted the deployment, but with conditions that reflected his hard-earned understanding of his own limitations. He would serve for no more than 4 months. He would have direct access to medical support for his service-connected disabilities. Most importantly, he would maintain the authority to withdraw from any situation he deemed too dangerous for someone with his physical limitations. The return to Afghanistan in March 2012 was emotionally challenging for Marcus in ways he hadn't anticipated. The familiar sights, sounds, and smells of the war zone triggered powerful memories of his previous service and the explosion that had ended his military career. For the first few days, he struggled with anxiety symptoms that made it difficult to focus on his analytical work. But gradually, Marcus adapted to being back in a combat environment. His role was different this time. Instead of being responsible for protecting other soldiers through direct action, he was providing intelligence analysis that helped military leaders make better decisions about how to protect their forces. The work was intellectually demanding but less emotionally stressful than his previous combat deployments. Marcus's analysis confirmed his remote assessments about the enemy training network, but also revealed additional details that were impossible to detect from afar. The network wasn't just sophisticated, it was huge. Hundreds of fighters were receiving advanced training every month, creating a pipeline of skilled combatants that threatened to overwhelm American tactical advantages throughout the region. More disturbing was evidence that the network was being funded and coordinated by state actors who had strategic interests in seeing American forces fail in Afghanistan. This wasn't just a terrorist training operation, it was part of a broader campaign to drive American forces out of the region by making their presence too costly to sustain. Marcus's recommendations evolved based on his ground-level observations. Instead of focusing solely on intelligence disruption, he proposed a comprehensive campaign to eliminate the network's leadership and destroy their training infrastructure. This would require significant resources and coordination between multiple military units, but it offered the possibility of permanently degrading the enemy's capabilities. The operation Marcus designed was ambitious and dangerous. It would involve simultaneous attacks on all 3 major training facilities coordinated to prevent enemy forces from reinforcing each other or escaping to establish new camps. Special operations forces would conduct the primary assaults, while conventional units would block escape routes and provide fire support. Marcus would play a crucial role in the operation, providing real-time intelligence analysis and tactical recommendations from a mobile command post positioned to observe all 3 target areas. His job would be to monitor enemy responses and adjust American tactics as the situation developed. But 3 weeks before the planned operation, Marcus received intelligence that changed everything. The enemy network had learned about the planned American assault and was preparing a trap designed to inflict massive casualties on attacking forces. Instead of finding training camps filled with inexperienced fighters, American soldiers would be walking into a carefully planned ambush involving hundreds of well-trained combatants armed with advanced weapons. Marcus faced an impossible decision: cancel the operation, and the training network would continue killing American soldiers indefinitely. Proceed with the attack, and dozens of American Special Operations personnel would likely be killed or wounded in the resulting battle. There was a third option, but it required Marcus to accept personal risks he had promised himself he would never take again. He could volunteer to infiltrate one of the target areas personally, providing ground-level intelligence that would allow American forces to avoid the trap and complete their mission successfully. The infiltration would require Marcus to use skills he hadn't employed since his sniper days, moving undetected through enemy territory, gathering intelligence while avoiding contact, and potentially engaging targets if discovered. His vision problems and other disabilities would make the mission extremely dangerous, But his experience and tactical knowledge gave him advantages that other personnel lacked. Marcus had 24 hours to decide whether to recommend cancelling the operation, proceeding with inadequate intelligence, or volunteering for a mission that could easily cost him his life. The choice would determine not just his own fate, but the lives of dozens of American soldiers and the success of efforts to degrade the enemy training network. As he considered his options, Marcus realized that this decision would define whether his story was ultimately about personal redemption or about service to something larger than himself. Both paths had merit, but only one was consistent with the values that had guided him through his military service, his recovery from injury, and his work helping other veterans overcome their own challenges. His decision would determine whether Marcus Rodriguez returned home as a successful consultant who had helped solve a difficult problem, or as something else entirely, a man who had found a way to serve his country and protect his fellow soldiers despite limitations that everyone had assumed were disqualifying. The clock was ticking, and American lives hung in the balance. Marcus made his decision at 0347 hours on April 23, 2012. Sitting alone in his quarters at Forward Operating Base Chapman while listening to the distant sound of artillery fire echoing through the Afghan mountains. He would volunteer for the infiltration mission, knowing that it represented everything he had tried to avoid since rebuilding his life after his medical discharge. But this time would be different. Marcus had learned hard lessons about the difference between courage and recklessness, between serving others and sacrificing himself unnecessarily. He would approach this mission with the wisdom that came from surviving his own limitations, using adaptive techniques he had developed over 3 years of recovery and growth. Colonel Mitchell's reaction to Marcus's volunteer was predictably mixed. He was relieved to have someone with the necessary skills willing to attempt the mission, but concerned about the risks to someone whose medical profile made him technically unfit for combat operations. "I can't officially authorize this," Mitchell said during their secure briefing. "If something goes wrong, I'll have to explain to Congress why I sent a disabled veteran on a mission that active-duty special operations personnel considered too dangerous." Marcus understood the political implications, but he also understood something Mitchell couldn't fully grasp. His disabilities weren't just limitations, they were also advantages that made him uniquely suited for this particular mission. His damaged vision forced him to rely more heavily on other senses, making him better at detecting threats in low-light conditions. His nerve damage made his hands shake when he was nervous, but steadied when he was focused and calm, providing a reliable indicator of his mental state. Most importantly, his experience adapting to physical limitations had taught him patience and careful planning that complemented his natural tactical instincts. The mission plan was necessarily complex. Marcus would be inserted by helicopter into mountainous terrain 30 kilometers from the primary target area, then make his way on foot to an observation position overlooking the enemy training camp. He would remain in place for 48 hours, gathering detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities, defensive positions, and preparations for the anticipated American assault. His extraction would be coordinated with the beginning of the main attack, allowing him to provide real-time intelligence updates during the crucial early phases of the operation. If everything went according to plan, Marcus would be safely aboard a helicopter before enemy forces realized they were under coordinated attack from multiple directions. But military operations rarely proceed according to plan, especially when the enemy is expecting them. Marcus prepared for contingencies that included being discovered during insertion, losing communication with American forces, and having to survive behind enemy lines for extended periods while evading capture. His equipment reflected both his capabilities and limitations. Instead of the heavy precision rifle he had carried during his original military service, Marcus selected a lighter semi-automatic weapon that was easier to maneuver with his vision problems. His night vision equipment was modified to compensate for his damaged right eye. His survival gear included extra medical supplies for managing his service-connected health issues during extended field operations. Most importantly, Marcus carried something he had never taken into combat before: a detailed written plan for every contingency he could imagine. His experience with anxiety and decision-making under stress had taught him the value of pre-planned responses to likely scenarios. Instead of relying solely on tactical instincts shaped by his original military training, he would use systematic approaches developed during his recovery to maintain effectiveness despite his limitations. The helicopter insertion took place during a moonless night in mountainous terrain that was familiar to Marcus from his previous deployments. Flying nap of the Earth to avoid enemy radar and anti-aircraft systems, the aircraft approached the landing zone at dangerously low altitude, while Marcus prepared for what might be his final combat mission. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was returning to the same type of dangerous solo operation that had ended his military career 3 years earlier. But this time, Marcus was operating with full knowledge of his capabilities and limitations, using techniques he had developed specifically for managing high-stress situations with compromised physical abilities. The helicopter touched down for exactly 30 seconds, just long enough for Marcus to exit with his equipment and disappear into the rocky terrain. As the aircraft departed, Marcus was alone in enemy territory with nothing but his training, his experience, and his hard-earned wisdom about adapting to impossible circumstances. The infiltration to his observation position took 18 hours of careful movement through terrain that was both familiar and completely alien. Marcus had operated in similar mountains during his original deployments, but never alone, never with his current physical limitations, and never with the knowledge that discovery would likely mean death or capture. His progress was slower than it would have been during his prime military years, but it was also more deliberate and careful. Marcus took time to observe each area before moving through it, using techniques he had learned from studying animal behavior during his recovery. Instead of fighting his environment, he became part of it, moving with patience that his younger self would have found frustrating, but that his current experience recognized as essential for survival. The target area was more heavily defended than intelligence reports had indicated. Marcus counted over 200 fighters in and around the main training camp, along with sophisticated defensive positions that suggested preparation for a siege rather than a training exercise. Anti-aircraft weapons were positioned to deny helicopter landing zones throughout the area. Communication equipment indicated coordination with other enemy forces throughout the region. Most concerning was evidence of advanced planning for the anticipated American assault. Enemy forces had prepared multiple ambush positions along likely approach routes. Fake defensive positions were designed to draw American fire while concealing the actual locations of enemy weapons. Escape routes were prepared and stocked with supplies, suggesting that enemy leaders expected to survive the attack and continue their operations from alternative locations. Marcus spent 46 hours in his observation position, gathering intelligence that completely changed American understanding of the enemy training network. This wasn't just a terrorist camp. It was a military headquarters coordinating operations throughout eastern Afghanistan and beyond. The sophistication of their preparations suggested involvement by military professionals with extensive experience fighting American forces. But Marcus also identified vulnerabilities that wouldn't have been apparent from satellite imagery or signals intelligence. The enemy's confidence had made them careless about certain types of surveillance. Their communication procedures revealed command relationships and planning timelines. Most importantly, their defensive preparations were optimized for conventional assault tactics, leaving them vulnerable to approaches that Marcus's unconventional perspective had identified. His intelligence reports during the mission completely changed the planned American operation. Instead of simultaneous assaults on multiple targets, Marcus recommended a sequential approach that would use the enemy's own defensive coordination against them. By attacking one facility and allowing enemies from other locations to reinforce it, American forces could concentrate superior firepower against a larger enemy force in more favorable terrain. The revised plan was elegant in its simplicity. American forces would conduct a deliberately obvious approach to the smallest and most heavily defended enemy position, drawing reinforcements away from the other training camps. Once enemy forces were concentrated in a disadvantageous position, overwhelming firepower would eliminate them, while other American units secured the now lightly defended primary targets. Marcus's role evolved from intelligence gathering to tactical coordination. His position overlooking the main valley gave him visual contact with all three target areas, making him the only person who could coordinate timing for the complex operation. Instead of being extracted before the assault began, he would remain in position to provide real-time updates and adjustments. The attack began at dawn on April 26, 2012. Marcus watched through his modified optics as American forces implemented the plan he had developed, using his intelligence to avoid enemy traps while exploiting weaknesses he had identified. It was intensely satisfying to see months of analysis and planning translate into tactical success, but it was also terrifying to realize that any mistakes in his recommendations would cost American lives. The operation proceeded exactly as Marcus had predicted for the first 3 hours. Enemy forces abandoned their prepared positions to reinforce what they believed was the primary American assault, concentrating in a valley where American artillery and air support could engage them effectively.